Okay, so what I'm going to talk about in this video is culture is data, culture as data. And so what we've been looking at in the course so far is kind of very much um, been looking at the way that individuals are increasingly data selves, what I've sometimes called a data zombie, and the way this kind of relates to inequalities and stuff like that. Here I'm going to think a little bit more about what this means for culture, particularly as we increasingly consume culture through platforms, and culture itself is increasingly gathered as data and then kind of used in various ways to categorize us in the ways we've talked about in the course so far. So consumption is now pretty much 24/7. Wherein say in the pre-internet times, if you wanted to buy something, for instance, you had to wait for a shop to open. Probably couldn't go on Sundays, or like you had to wait till like if you're out of work time, go on Thursday night or something. Obviously now we live in a world where there's shopping available 24/7. We have access to popular culture 24/7 through all these different platforms. Increasingly you don't buy culture as a material thing. Of course, there's still kind of scenes and stuff like that kind of is interested in buying records and or actually having hardcover books or DVDs or whatever, but for the most part, people are consuming through streaming. So essentially, that means that the artifacts themselves are ephemeral. They're not actual things that you can hold in your hand. Again, very changes our relation to cultural artifacts and things. So this has been, very obviously a key sociological area of interest over the past couple of decades. It also changes what it therefore means to be a fan, right? So like there's still collectibles and stuff like that going on, but like increasingly curating playlists and stuff like that is actually an expression of fandom, more so than say owning the an 7-inch version of the Japanese record of your favorite punk band or whatever. It's as much now as kind of displaying your taste through these other mechanisms. So there's always been debates about like the culture industries, how huge multinational corporations are the ones that kind of fund and produce popular culture. They're the ones that disseminate it, distribute it. They're the ones, therefore, to have control a lot over the ideological messages that are part of it. And through the kind of Frankfurt School and Birmingham School kind of understandings, have been great for helping us to get some kind of sociological understanding of what this means for everyday life and what this means for different forms of inequalities. The datafication and financialization process of this, the way that kind of, particularly things are more based on a subscription model now rather than buying individual things, challenges aspects of those previous ways of thinking about the culture industries, but also, reinforces some of them as well. I've mentioned kind of the way that taste is really important in this. Taste is understanding our taste, what we like and don't like is really key data points. And I've drawn upon Bourdieu's famous kind of taste classifiers and it classifies the classifier. Again, understanding these relations, I think, is now, you know, objectively, qualitatively different. Um, if, these things are being judged not so much by humans anymore, but like, algorithms and AI kind of data proxy machines. A machine doesn't really know, the experience or emotions of listening to your favorite song. It can only kind of make up those meanings and attach it and attribute it to other classifications. This is a very different kind of form of social relation than I think our relations to the things that we like and don't like, compared to the things we like and don't like from previous times. So the data gaze here, in some ways, again reinforces those notions of distinction between identifying with others or against others through what we like and what we don't like. But it's also kind of changing it here. So the machine itself is kind of doing that work in the background, often without us really understanding, and therefore through our various platforms, we're fed things we already like. This will obviously have implications for how we engage with culture, how we engage with others, and how we come to discover new things or not. There's a kind of element of control here that you could argue is being lost. This has been particularly looked at, I think, interestingly through analysis of Spotify, and that's kind of the platform I'll focus on over the next few minutes. And last year was kind of announced, like there was news that kind of the Spotify CEO had invested 600 million euro of his own money to fund war drone companies. And so, it's pretty straightforward comment now that like your participation on Spotify is funding killing machines. When I say your, mine as well. I found myself like wanting to get off Spotify, but I do find the ease and use of the platform hard to kind of cut the cord from. So there's always been horizontal and vertical integration in terms of companies, culture industry companies throughout, the 20th century had connections to electronics companies and bomb making companies and all kinds of different kind of weird associations and problematic connections. IBM being a key example there, if you're interested in the way that kind of technology companies are at the center of how, deciding who lives and dies, have a look at the work on IBM in the Second World War. Um, but there's something more kind of direct and pernicious about this. I mean, again, always kind of heads of companies were made rich, but now they're being made uber rich to the point where they can spend, hundreds of millions of dollars of their own money, not even the company's money, to pursue their own, what are essentially kind of fascistic ends. This is particularly propped up by legal forms and social relations, um, and particularly the way that these kind of companies kind of just break stuff. They largely ignore current laws and just kind of get on with doing with whatever they want. And we'll look at the aspects of that when we look at data colonialism later in the course. So there's a kind of new value system happening here in terms of our kind of cultural consumption, where in the past there were certain ideologies involved in kind of what you like and don't like. That's still the case. Where you make particular companies rich and particular people within them rich, that's still the case. But the kind of direct association now, the way the kind of tech billionaires can kind of, you know, uh, fund war drones or fund Palantir and all these other companies that are invading our lives and deciding who lives and dies, and actually then actively being involved, who gets killed in war or who gets locked up, in terms of policing, seems to be a more pernicious and even more kind of like um, darkly efficient mode of social control. Much of the work around critically analyzing various platforms is mostly done by investigative journalists. It's hard for academics to get access to any of this kind of stuff. Our ethics committees are kind of very strict on what we can and can't do. People in the industries are often not likely to talk to you. Whistleblowers are rare. So it's kind of left to investigative journalists around the world to investigate this stuff. Liz Pelly's amazing book, Mood Machine, and her journalism over the years has been key to kind of getting what's going on inside Spotify and getting people to talk to her about, what are some of the meanings and the data and the kind of various inner mechanisms. Um, so the later chapters in that book kind of start to think about beyond just the cultural ramifications into the kind of how data is collected and how that data is kind of mission creeping across into other sectors of the economy and sectors of society. So she talks to industry insiders that point out that every click you've made in the app has been logged somewhere. You should just be under the assumption that Spotify app is what you're doing there is going to be recorded. People are essentially talking these days about Spotify being not really even being a music company anymore. It's got nothing to do with music. It's about data. And certainly Spotify is increasingly making very lucrative partnerships with, other companies. So it turns out, another insider here talking that Spotify shares information with data brokers. This in turn, that data is on sold to another place. It'll be on sold again. And again, there's a kind of a way of kind of making our profiles. But what's interesting to me about that is then the kind of ontological issues around what the data is that Spotify has and how it may be used or misused in other ways. Um, another really good book in this area is Eric Drott's Streaming Music, Stream It Capital. And I think this the quote here is particularly important. In addition, the fact that platforms share such data with various third-party partners, including major data aggregators, such as those companies, means that the information that platforms collect, not just about users' musical behaviors, but by means of their musical behaviors, may feed algorithmic systems in far-flung sectors of the economy. So this data is going into credit rating, insurance pricing, risk assessment, and so on. And we know Spotify has partnered with a lot of other social media companies and other kind of digital industries, Tesla, Tinder, and others, the airline industry. what's worrying for me is they're increasingly partnering with kind of gene technology places and Ancestry.com and 23andMe, arguing that like they can basically, Spotify are arguing to these partners that they can sell you your moods. They argue that what you're listening to at a particular time then correlates to the mood that you're in, and therefore these other companies will be able to kind of use that information to, I don't know, make you stay on their platform longer or sell you stuff or whatever. Now, I fundamentally think that that's silly. I don't think that the music we listen to necessarily correlates with the mood. Um, I don't just listen to, say, I don't know, Rage Against the Machine if I'm angry, and I don't just listen to Elliott Smith if I'm sad. Um, I'm not sure how much my music listening habits correlate with my moods. It probably does sometimes and not so much other times. Also find it a bit weird because Spotify itself knows that people often listen to playlists. Now, sometimes those playlists have particular emotional names. It's like, sad nights or, playlists to get ready when you're going out. But people are listening to music all the time when they're studying and trying to sleep and all that kind of stuff. So I'm intrigued to see how that relates to moods. I suppose it does in some ways and not in others. So I'm dubious about the actual efficacy of whether Spotify can sell your mood onto others, but it doesn't really matter. If the buyers think they can and they think they can manipulate and use that for their own wants and needs, they'll buy it. It's incredibly lucrative. So marketers, credit agencies, banks, healthcare providers, all these different kind of places are very much after this data. They're already kind of doing partnerships. We know that they've done this thing with Credit Media, uses music streaming data to decide whether to approve loans or not. I'm not sure about, what that means, like what kind of taste means you're more likely to get a loan. Probably the people running the algorithm don't either. They've also partnered with this kind of Lendo that kind of uses concert ticket data to decide whether you get loans to approve buying textbooks in the US. Again, I don't know if going to more or less concerts is good for buying textbooks. I imagine going to less concerts is, but who knows? Again, you can kind of see the absurdity of this in many respects, but this is how they're being used. So broadly here, um, our relation to culture, our relation to cultural artifacts, the things that we kind of engage with to participate and consume culture, has fundamentally changed in the new kind of digital world. We can think about this through, who owns your selfie, for instance, a selfie being now a key kind of cultural activity. Who owns it? Well, maybe not you as much as you think. There's copyright, there's identity theft going on, aggregation of your data, the way that these things can be fed into AI facial recognition things. Um, so what's interesting here is like there's been some kind of key examples. I'll show one in a minute about like, who owns the selfie. You would think the selfie being taken by you on your device of you, you would own it, but it's not necessarily the case. An interesting kind of thing to think about here from a critical lens, though, and maybe to kind of implicate us as users, is like, should we be able to kind of assert our right to privacy when we're kind of voluntarily eroding it already by, clicking and agreeing to the terms and conditions of all the platforms and devices that we use? So I think things like that are a kind of nice crunch point really to think about, what we want out of these things. Can we resist them in ways that we can maybe affect the legalities and notions of privacy in the future? The famous example here is the monkey selfie, a case from quite a few years ago now. I won't go into the case too much. I haven't used the photo there because it seems like there's still ongoing legal challenges when anyone ever uses it. But like, this guy planted cameras to capture wildlife stuff. Um, Monkey took its photo. The cameraman decided to sue people. It's all very complex, but like, the monkey then later lost on appeal. It's a really nice case. You can click on the link there that's kind of highlighted as Indonesia to read about that story. Yeah, and I think the last point there is really important. This raises crucial issues over who owns the right to take and circulate images, who gets to profit from them, not just of humans, but also other species that, don't have consent. The other interesting thing I think that the kind of datification of everything and the financialization of everything thinks about in terms of like the way that culture is now remembered or stored or archived. Again, now that it's not really things, Museums, libraries, your own collections or whatever, are less the way that these things are archived and then more hosted in this kind of more ephemeral, immaterial ways. So, your memory now is kind of hosted on social media. Um, the kind of the way that kind of commercial entities and copyright and moderation works to decide, what's important and who can access things in the future. There's certainly the way that profit of things is a key consideration of the way platforms decide what's archived and what's not, and what remains up and what's not. Um, and where does the content go when platforms decide that it's not going to be there anymore? Do we have our autonomy to remove data and images in terms of the way that we engage these machines? And what's particularly interesting too is this kind of way that humans are still very much central to how this moderation happens. Whether that's kind of moderation on platforms to kind of decide what can be up there or not, moderation decide what's important, all these kind of relations between what was previously material things and now more kind of immaterial things fundamentally changes how culture is going to be stored, studied, and remembered. Okay, I'll leave it there and I'll come back to talk about digitalized culture and commodification of taste with Sam Whiting.